What you've just seen is Cataclysm Druid absolutely destroying Torment 4. Hello everyone, I'm Fallen Messiah. If you're new here, welcome. If not, welcome back. This is finally the most definitive video guide for Cataclysm Druid in Diablo 4 in Season 7. First of all, I want to thank all of you for your massive support regarding my first Cataclysm guide that I released during the PTR 2 months ago. Over 7,000 people watched it by now, which is huge for a small channel like mine. So I want to thank everyone who watched, commented, liked, or interacted with the video in any way. And now finally, this is the Season 7 live version of the build. It's been long overdue, I know, but I spent a lot of time playing the build, constantly tinkering with it and optimizing it for you, and this is the final version. In this video, I will cover everything from skills, gear, different build variants, Paragon, gameplay, and more. Below the video, you will also have the written guide that I constantly update as well. This is going to be a long video where I cover absolutely everything for you, so we're gonna go straight to it. But before that, if you find any of this helpful to you, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's free and it really helps a ton a small channel like mine. Anyway, let's get straight to it. So, why Cataclysm? Because it's fun. It has a massive AoE that actually goes beyond the screen that you can see. It's visually spectacular, and it does all of your damage for you, as you're just running around while things around you get obliterated. It's gorgeous, very easy gun and run build that's not hard to pilot, and with some tweaks, you can also easily farm P tiers 100 plus as well. First of all, we have to talk about two main build variants. The Torment 4 willpower stacking build and the Snapshot pit pushing build. I first came up with the Cataclysm Druid build when I noticed some very important changes in the patch notes, specifically the way that it interacts with Lightning Bolt. There are several key changes in Season 7 that make the build much more powerful than in the previous versions. First of all, the most important item that makes the build work, the Bionic Ring, has been reworked. Now, Cataclysm also receives our Lightning Bolt benefits. We also have a new aspect called Runeworker's Conduit that says that for every 100 willpower we have, our Lightning Bolt damage is increased by 15% multiplicative. So, the Torment 4 build takes advantage of this interaction. Simply put, willpower equals Lightning Bolt damage equals Cataclysm damage. The Snapshot version, however, was inspired by a player called iBoilerUp, who is one of the best Druid players around, and he had an older Cataclysm build that used it. Ultimately, the final version of both builds is basically me testing both his and my ideas out until I came up with things that, in my opinion, work the best. So why the difference in builds? Simply put, Snapshot mechanic is not my favorite one. It takes some finesse to do it. And in my opinion, we really don't need to bother with it at all if all you're going to be doing is run Torment 4 content. Make no mistake, Torment 4 version will absolutely crush Helltides, Headhunt Zones, Infernal Hordes, or whatever else you want to throw at it, without ever needing to snapshot. That's why I showed you the beginning clip in the first place. In my opinion, having to snapshot every time you're about to do an activity in-game detracts from the experience. Hence, the Torment 4 version. However, you will need to hit certain thresholds for the build to work. You will need at least around Paragon 190 to 200 depending on your renown. You will need to select all of your legendary nodes, level all glyphs at least to level 45 and make sure both of their effects are online. You need to have all of your Witchpowers and at least first legendary occult gems that I'll talk about later. You will also need to have an armor cap and res cap in Torment 4, or at least close to it, if you want to survive the content. However, that's not hard to do because incenses offer huge amounts of survivability in Season 7. With all of that said, however, snapshotting is just too powerful to ignore. If you aim to do high pit clears, especially pits 90+, you will need to master the snapshot mechanic that I will talk about later in the video. In the snapshot version, we are critting and overpowering all the time, so we are stacking as much max life as possible on our gear. Snapshot version easily clears pit 100 within 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so now that we covered all of that, let's get straight to the skill portion of this video. I will just quickly go over the skills and I will explain different variants and what we can do later. Primary skill, Storm Strike, Enhanced Storm Strike. We're going over for Polarize, Enhanced Polarize, Primal Polarize, Iron Fur, for damage reduction while we're in the Warbear form, 1 point Earthen Bulwark, Enhanced and Preserving, 1 point in Cyclone Armor, just for extra added protection, 3 points in Backlash, Fortitude, and Vigilance. These are all just great multiplicatives. Every time we're using either Cyclone Armor or Bulwark, we get damage reduction. We also get multiplicative damage too. 3 points in Nature's Reach, 3 points in Feral Aptitude, 3 points in Electric Shock, Charge Atmosphere, Endless Tempest, 1 point Hurricane, Enhanced Hurricane, Savage Hurricane. 1 point for Neurotoxin, only so that we can go to Envenom, which is our strongest multiplier here. I have 9 levels here. As you can see, 90% crit strike damage, which is multiplicative by the way. It basically doubles my crit strike damage. Make sure you have as much Envenom as you can. 3 points Defiance, 3 points Natural Disaster, 3 points Resonance. Max out your Cataclysm, Prime, Supreme. Now I put 2 points in Defensive Posture. You can also put 1 point here and 1 point in Natural Resolve if you wish. 3 points Quick Shift, 3 points Heightened Senses. The main difference in skills between two builds. In the willpower stacking build, we are going with Perfect Storm. This is just straight up 60% damage multiplier, because our enemies are always vulnerable thanks to the Cataclysm. For the Snapshot version, we are going for Ursine Strength instead to get that 70% multiplicative increase in overpowered damage. Now let's talk about gear. First of all, we're starting with the willpower stacking build. The most important item is Mjolnir Ring. It enables the entire build. You also need Irida's Inexorable Will and Tempest Roar. These 3 items are mandatory, and without them, the build does not work. Now I'm gonna go over each and every item just to show you what's important. So Tempest Roar makes all of our storm skills also werewolf skills. This alone allows us to tap into all kinds of multipliers that we usually wouldn't be able to have access to. So if you scroll over here, Cataclysm, you can see that it's also a werewolf skill. It also has these additional tags due to the witch power interactions, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. As far as the stats are concerned, willpower is the only one you really care about. Other stats here are not important. Make sure to masterwork willpower 3 times if you can. I did it 2 times. I didn't have enough materials. The legendary affix is irrelevant. We're only here for our storm skills to become werewolf skills. That's it. Shroud of False Death is the best in slot. However, if you don't have that, in the written form of the guide, you actually have Ancestral version and the Mythic version. The only difference between these 2 versions is this item. This is the only Mythic that we have. It's the best in slot by far, but if you don't have it, Mad Wolf's Glee is a very capable alternative. It provides up to 7 extra ranks to our Cataclysm skill, which is our werewolf skill thanks to our interaction with the Tempest Roar. So you start with this, and then once you're able to, make sure to get the Shroud. This +1 to all passives is just ridiculous. It provides so much utility, so much damage reduction for us. For Masterworking, make sure you masterwork all stats because we are stacking the willpower. Of course, if you are playing the Snapshot version, you're going to masterwork max life instead. For our gloves, we are using the Runeworker's Conduit. The stats on the aspect are irrelevant. The damage range is irrelevant. Get the first one that you can, it doesn't matter. Now, for this particular slot, I strongly recommend Fire Resistance. You will have a lot of Lightning Res thanks to the Tempest Roar and Flicker Step. It will always be maxed out. Lots of mobs and monsters in this game do fire damage. In my opinion, you should strive to max that one out first. Either way, for the willpower stacking version, we're going with willpower, crit strike chance, and the third one is whatever you want. I personally advise you to cover your resistance or armor depending on what you're lacking for the third slot. Our tempers, Hurricane Duration, which is very important, and Lightning Bolt damage, which directly impacts our Cataclysm damage. For Masterworking, Masterwork willpower if you can. For the pants, you want willpower, max life, and the third stat can be armor or it can be max resistance, or it can be a different kind of resist that you're lacking. You can cover yourself here, so you don't have to take exactly the way I have it. If you have more armor than resistances, then put resistance on the third slot. These pants are a bit of a compromise. I decided to go with willpower and life, and to stack on life on masterwork, because then I can use these pants for both the Torment 4 and the Snapshot build. Because I can, for example, take a different kind of pants and then triple masterwork willpower, but I'm already destroying Torment 4 mobs as it is, so I decided to make a bit of a hybrid. Anyway, for the Snapshot version, you want to masterwork max life. For T4, you want to masterwork willpower. Quicker Step is definitely the best slot boots here. Now, these are not the best version. Ideally, you also want greater affix on movement speed. However, make sure you get the legendary affix to as close as 4 as possible. We are going to be evading through mobs all the time. You will see during the gameplay section how our Cataclysm cooldown just drops suddenly. This is thanks to the evade. It's very powerful. It's a great way to really reduce the cooldown for the Cataclysm. The stats, the best are movement speed and ultimate damage. Lightning resistance and damage reduction from close enemies is okay, but really, it doesn't really matter. For masterworking, try to masterwork movement speed as much as you can. Now let's talk about weapons. For Torment 4 version, ideally, best weapon is polearm because of the vulnerable damage implicit, but you really can do with any weapon as long as it has 0.9 attacks per second, because that is the weapon with the biggest damage range. We want our Cataclysm to have as much of a damage as possible. Attack speed is a completely irrelevant stat to us, we don't care about that. So a weapon with the biggest base damage is the one that you want to use. For Torment 4, we're going with willpower, max life, crit strike damage, and also tempers are. First of all, the biggest temper, most important one on this entire gear is chance for Cataclysm to deal double damage. This is direct double damage multiplier. So it goes without saying, it's the most important one here. Try to triple crit it if you can. I only double crit it, so I still lose a lot of damage here. I only have 82% chance to do double damage. Ideally, this should be higher. Second temper is Storm critical strike chance, because on Torment 4 version, we are not critting all the time. We are actually relying on crit chance to do most of our damage. With this temper, I'm actually around 90% crit chance, so I'm critting basically all the time. For the Snapshot version, however, we are going with willpower, maximum life, and overpowered damage instead, and we are going with a two-handed mace because of the overpowered damage implicit. We get almost 400% additive damage. It's nothing to scoff at, so if you're really able to, try to get the mace, but if not, any 0.9 attack per second weapon will do. For tempers, we are also rolling with chance for Cataclysm to deal double damage. Try to masterwork it as much as you can. Second temper is lightning bolt damage because it directly contributes to Cataclysm damage. Now, this is a new aspect called Apogeic Furor. It's our biggest damage multiplier in this entire build. So basically, every time we cast Cataclysm, we get 20% extra damage. It goes up to 10 stacks, which is 200% damage. That's a lot. So basically, the way we're playing this build, we are trying to spam Cataclysm as much as we can. Not just to keep the buffs and to keep the snapshot, but also to make sure we get this buff running all the time. There are 10 stacks. 9 stacks is where the damage is highest. At stack number 10, it actually resets your cooldown and resets the stacks as well. I'm gonna talk about this a little bit more in the gameplay section of the video. Now let's get to the amulet. Because good amulets are really hard to come by, I kind of combined one amulet for both builds. So I'm running with willpower percentage, max life, and envenom. You can get something similar to this. In the guide, it's going to say quick shift. Either way, don't worry too much if you can't get any of these passives. Just get the best amulet that you can with willpower and life, and you can roll in the third passive, which should always be envenom. If you already have the best in slot, which is willpower percentage, envenom, quick shift, great. If not, you can use something like this. Try to masterwork envenom as much as you can. It's a huge damage multiplier. For our tempers, we're going with lightning bolt damage and cataclysm. For our aspect, we're going with the changing's depth. It says that we deal increased damage when we hit a poisoned enemy as a werebear or a crowd control enemy as a werewolf. Our Cataclysm on level 5 slows down opponents all the time, that's crowd control, and it also has a werewolf tag because of the Tempest Roar, so it's proccing this 100% of the time. This is up to 100% extra multiplier, so it's really best in slot to have right here. Iridux Inexorable Will is another amazing item. So first of all, if you can masterwork willpower, do so. Any combination of masterworking between willpower and ultimate cooldown reduction is great. Other two stats, not really important. What this does is once we cast Cataclysm, it's going to pull in the mobs to us, and then 5 seconds later, it's going to do the same thing again. This is amazing because it's going to keep pulling mobs towards us, and then once it does, we can actually evade through them for huge reduction in Cataclysm and just increasing our overall damage. So it's really nice extra crowd control. On top of that, it also deals a fair bit of damage depending on your willpower as well. But ultimately, it just has great stats for the build. This ultimate cooldown reduction is something that we really cannot do without. And finally, Mjolnir Ring. Mjolnir Ring is the item that makes the entire build work. Now, first of all, there are two main stats here that are most important to us. This is Willpower and Endless Tempest. Endless Tempest is passive, makes our Cataclysm and Hurricane last longer. And Hurricane is important because, in case I didn't already mention, Storm Shifters Aspect slaps +5 ranks to our shapeshifting skills, which Cataclysm is thanks to the Tempest Roar when we have Hurricane active. We want to make sure we always have Hurricane active before we cast Cataclysm. Regarding the Mjolnir Ring, first of all, the damage range is insane. It goes from 40 to 100. Up to 100 is a direct damage multiplier. So my recommendation is get the ring as close to 100 affix as possible. Whether it's ancestral or not, it doesn't matter. I've seen people make this mistake a lot on the market because they would rather have an ancestral ring that has 70% damage than an ancestral ring that has 90+. That's a mistake. First, focus on getting the ring as close to 100 as possible, then try to replace it with an ancestral version that has similar damage range. And you should prioritize Endless Tempest first and Willpower second. Okay, so now that we talked about skills and gear, we have to talk about the new thing in the season, which are the Witchpowers. They're immensely powerful, and their combination with occult gems add tons of damage and utility to this build. So let's take a look at all our options here. We are going with Aura of Siphoning. Aura of Siphoning poisons enemies around us, but more importantly, it provides a source of aura, which is essential for our legendary gem. Aura specialization is the only witch power here you actually have to find in the wild, but it's really not that hard. Just run pits and nightmare dungeons and other things that you ordinarily would play. Eventually, you're gonna come up with these forgotten altars, and eventually you will unlock this. This makes our auras gain up to 160 plus in size. The second part of this also says that we deal more crit strike damage to enemies within our auras, which is also a nice bonus as well. Purging Touch. Your Eldritch effects deal 48% increased damage to all enemies. Our gems make sure that our Cataclysm is also an Eldritch skill, so we get this on all enemies all the time. Soul Harvest. This basically provides more primary core stats to us, and again, willpower equals more damage. And finally, we have Decay Augmentation. Now, this is very important. Our Witch Power effects deal an additional 40% of their damage over 5 seconds. This damage is dealt as bleeding, burning, poisoning, or shadow depending on your class. For our class, this is poison. This is essential to know because we need to have a source of poison damage for our Envenom and for other multipliers that we will talk about. So the interaction between Voice of the Stars, legendary gem, and Decay Augmentation, Witch Power, means that our Cataclysm is going to poison all enemies around us. There is a spirit boon here called Overload that makes our storm skills do poisoning damage. So until you unlock that interaction, you have to select this first. We'll talk about boons once we cover the legendary gems. So there are 3 legendary gems that you can use for the build. First one is called Voice of the Stars. While we have an aura active, our ultimate skills are also treated as witchcraft skills. And also, our ultimate skills deal 10% multiplicative damage. The damage bonus is okay, but what this really means is that our Cataclysm is tagged as a Witch Power skill, therefore benefiting from lots of other interactions. For our second legendary gem, we're going to be using Friend of the Bog. Friend of the Bog says, while you have 3 or more growth and decay Witch powers equipped, we have 8% primary core stat, 10% max life, and unhindered, allowing us to move through enemies freely. We are having exactly 3 growth and decay spells, which means we are benefiting from this all the time. The third gem can be whatever you want. It can be, for example, Toadling's Wish that I have in the guide, which allows your growth and decay Witch powers more potency. Personally, right here, I'm actually running this one that says my Eldritch powers are getting more potent because I wanted to increase the power of the Purging Touch. You can do whatever you want. There is also a legendary gem that provides a 3% damage reduction for every level of your ultimate. Every unique Witch power has up to 5 levels, that's up to 15% damage reduction. That's pretty powerful. Although, realistically speaking, having 3 legendary occult gems is a lot of resources, but that's definitely something that you can do. Oh, and by the way, I skipped the unique Witch power. We're using the Vengeful Spirit Servant. Every 15 seconds, we are invulnerable for 10 seconds. That's actually very powerful. You can use something else if you want. This is not mandatory, but I definitely recommend it. Okay, so now that we covered Witch powers and occult gems, let's go to the Spirit Boons. For the Torment 4 version, we are going with Wariness, 15% reduction for elites, increased crit strike chance and lucky hit chance, and also crit strike damage. Over here, extending the duration of our ultimate skills. And here you can actually take your pick. You can go for Masochistic for heal, or Calm Before the Storm if you want more reduction. Again, you need Overload until you unlock the interaction between Decay Augmentation and Voice of the Stars. For the Snapshot version, the only difference we're making is instead of Sight Talent, we are going to put Iron Feather instead. For Mercenaries, our active Mercenary is going to be Subo. Just for that Seeker, it's really powerful, really useful to see all the enemies around. Wire Trap, Ready at Hand, Cover Fire, and finally Opening Fire for extra crit strike damage bonus. For our Reinforcement, we have 2 options. More defensive option is to go with Bastion and put it when you become injured. More defensive option is to go for Crater and then select Cataclysm. And then your Rakir will actually do additional pull on your enemies every time you use Cataclysm. Okay, so we talked about skills, gear, boons, witchcraft, and occult gems. Now let's talk about Paragon. So first of all, if I have more nodes selected than you and I have a higher level than you, don't worry about it. Just follow the planner that I will link in the video and you'll be fine. So I'm going to explain the logic behind Paragon and what you should do with any extra points. First of all, our starting node is Electrocution. The reason why is because this is our most important glyph. Lightning bolt damage equals Cataclysm damage. We're putting Electrocution on the starting board because here is the highest number of normal nodes for us to grab. Any extra Paragon points go here first. You're grabbing every single willpower to increase lightning bolt damage. This is only after you unlocked every single glyph and node on the Paragon board. Now, first of all, when it comes to the rotation, how you're going to rotate them, that doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is that you follow the order on the Paragon boards. You make sure that you unlock every single legendary node and glyph along the way. If you're going to pick this first, or if you're going to pick this first, that doesn't matter to me. Anyway, second node is Thunderstruck. This is just straight up 60% damage multiplier. Storm skills deal increased damage equal to 20% of our damage versus close and damage versus distance. Generally speaking, you're going to have a lot of that on your gear already. There are also nodes here that help to proc that effect. For example, right over here. Here, we're going with the Earth and Sky for the Torment 4 version. I will talk about Snapshot variation a bit later. So the reason why we're putting Earth and Sky here is simply because it provides a bonus to magic nodes. So if we pick up these extra storm damage or damage to close, we get a little bit extra bonus for it. Moving on to the third node, Ancestral Guidance. After spending 75 Spirit, which we are doing thanks to our Pulverize, we deal 40% multiplicative damage for 5 seconds. Our ultimate skills also deal more damage as well. So this is our third node. Over here we're going to put Spirit for our crit strike damage. So if you finished your electrocution starting board and you picked every willpower, any remaining Paragon points goes here secondly. I don't know if you'll notice, but I grabbed every single dexterity there is to grab on this board to further increase my crit strike damage. So any extra points go here. Our third board is Lust for Carnage. Crit strikes with werewolf skills restore spirit and deal 50% multiplicative damage. Thanks to Tempest Roar, our Cataclysm is a werewolf skill, so we are benefiting from this at all times. For our glyph here, we're opting in for Keeper. It has 15% increased non-physical damage and also another further multiplier once we unlock level 45. And finally, for our ultimate board, we are going with Heightened Malice. Heightened Malice basically deals 35% multiplicative damage every time we poison an enemy. We are poisoning enemies all the time. It also deals additional 5% for every additional enemy up to 4, which is another 20 extra multiplier for a total of up to 55, which you're going to be having pretty much all the time. This is a huge damage bonus. Our final node is Headhunter. We are dealing increased damage to elites and just increased damage overall, but also this is an extra bonus for our normal nodes. So once you finish leveling up your electrocution and spirit and you selected all willpower and dexterity there, and the remaining points go here. Because every willpower that we select around this node actually receives a bonus. So instead of 5, every willpower is actually 9 here. So once you selected every willpower from electrocution node and every dexterity from spirit node, this is your third stop. However, there are also some other things that are pretty nice on this board that you can select if you're struggling with defenses. So for example, here we have poison resistance. Over here, Natureborn, up to 12% damage reduction for poison enemies. And here is another 3 for a total of 21% damage reduction from poison enemies. And they're poisoned all the time. So this is actually not a bad thing to have. So if you struggle with defenses, skip the willpower here and grab these around Natureborn first. Thanks to your Shroud, you should always have enough stats to activate this. Just further ahead, you also have additional resistances and armor over here. Now, the only difference in Paragon between the Snapshot version and the Torment 4 version is on our second board, instead of Earth and Sky, we're going with Dominate. Dominate is going to dramatically increase our overpower damage, and also we deal more damage when we overpower, which we are doing all the time. So just replace Earth and Sky with Dominate, and make sure to grab every single intelligence that you can for that extra damage. And there you go guys, we are almost done. Now the only thing remaining is the gameplay portion of the video, where I'm going to demonstrate how to actually play the game, as well as how the snapshot itself also works. Let's start with the Torment 4 version first. So over here we have Pulverize. The function of Pulverize is twofold. We need a Spirit Spender to activate the buff, and we also need a Bear Attack for Quick Shift. But basically, what you would do is, first you Pulverize 2 times, you get the buff, you can see it here, you activate Hurricane, you activate Earthen Bulwark, and you activate Cataclysm. And that's it. As you can see, I have enough crit chance that I'm critting pretty much all the time. I can evade to my opponents. See how I immediately got Cataclysm back, because I just got tons of cooldown reduction from evading. Make sure you always apply Hurricane before reapplying Cataclysm. Cataclysm will remember the buffs from Earthen Bulwark, Ancestral Spirit, here. It will not, however, remember the Hurricane buff, so you always have to make sure it stays on before you activate Cataclysm. And that's pretty much it. For Torment 4, this is enough. You go through, things die, you evade to get the Cataclysm back. If you struggle, hit them every now and then to get the 15% damage reduction with your Storm Strike. And that's the gameplay. Now, if you're going to min-max things, here are a couple of tips and tricks that you can do. I have 9 stacks of Apogeic Fur. So I have 200% extra multiplicative damage. That's huge. However, once I press it again, look what happens. Bam. It reset the cooldowns and it reset the stacks. But because it reset the stacks and cooldowns, I can cast Cataclysm again. So just a nice little tip for you. If you're casting Cataclysm on 9 stacks, you can double tap it to gain 2 stacks at once. So just being mindful of how many buffs you have, that's 30% extra multiplicative damage, just because you remembered that you can tap it once more. Just a little min-maxing for you, in case you ever need it. For more advanced min-maxing, you might have noticed that staying on higher stacks, 7, 8, 9, is a lot better than 1, 2, 3 stacks. So depending on where you are, for example, in the pit, you might not want to refresh your Cataclysm if you're already on 8 or 9 stacks, for example. If you have enough time to kill the boss or anything. But that's a little bit more advanced for your average gameplay and not really something you need, but I'm still mentioning it just in case. And that's pretty much it. Now, there are a couple of variations that you can do. In iBoiler Up's guide, he actually was using Mole. I tested Mole together with Enhanced Mole for Fortify. To be honest, I found that it doesn't really contribute much to the build. It takes a long time for you to fortify with Mole, so instead I just decided to pick Storm Strike because you hit once with Storm Strike and you immediately get 15% damage reduction. I just find it to be a lot more impactful, so I decided to get rid of this skill. However, if you, for example, wish, you can replace Polarize with Shred to be faster, and in that case, you have a little bit more mobility. If you do that, then you have to put Mole in, because you need a bear attack for Quick Shift. So that's something else that you can do. Now, also, on the written guide, under the Snapshot variation, you will find skills are a little bit more different. For example, what I did, instead of this, in Cyclone Armor, you will see there is Debilitating Roar instead. This allows us to deal 15% increased damage while the Roar is active. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't care about the Roar at all. During my testing, I found that it neither makes nor breaks the build. If you already have enough damage with the Roar, you have enough damage without it. And if you're struggling with damage, it's not really gonna help you. So I definitely prefer to remove it and put a single point on Cyclone Armor, and it just sits there but helps me with survivability. And then these extra 2 points can go here, or one can go here and one can go here for more Fortify. This is something that I personally feel more comfortable with, and this is something that I use in both Torment 4 and Snapshot variants. However, I am going to leave the Roar version on the Snapshot build in the written guide, just in case someone out there really wants to min-max their damage. But I promise you, 9 times out of 10, you really don't need this skill. And now, finally, we have to talk about snapshotting. Please follow carefully. It's not super complicated once you get into it, but anyway. So we have here these 2 bars. Our first interaction is Igni Zan. Igni stores offering every 0.3 seconds up to 500. We need 700 to activate the effect, which means our skills overpower and crit. Our second one is Back plus Zax, which means that once we travel 40 meters, our next non-basic skill cast spends all of our resource to deal up to 100% damage. That is our Cataclysm. So how do we proc this? So first of all, I'm going to walk a little bit. I'm filling up this meter as I walk, okay? Now I'm going to cast Hurricane. Look at this. My next skill cast is going to trip this, right? So, the second I activate this with my walking, I'm going to press Bulwark and I'm going to press Cataclysm. You see what I did? And as you can see, now I'm overpowering and critting at the same time. As long as I can maintain this buff, and if you follow this guide, you should have no problem with that. You can also evade through your opponents. As long as I keep refreshing the duration, it's going to keep overpowering and critting at the same time. So that is snapshotting in general. You always have to be mindful of these 2 bars, where they are. So you proc the Hurricane and then Bulwark. Why Bulwark? In case I wasn't clear. because we have this passive over here called Backlash, which means we get 16% multiplicative damage for 5 seconds. And our Cataclysm remembers that. So, Hurricane, Bulwark, and then Cataclysm. Once we activate the first bar, which is our back, we activate our second, we activate Cataclysm. That's essentially it. It's going to take you some time to master it, but it is worth it because the damage difference is tremendous between snapshotting and not snapshotting. However, let me show you what my main problem with rune words is in Diablo 4. Let me give you a demonstration. Okay, so what I did is I left the training grounds and I returned back. Now, you may notice that these bars do not reset, and that's the problem. So the first time you basically interact with these mechanics, the bars, the levels do not change. They do not reset even after you go to town and go back. Why is that an issue? Well, simply because you have to be mindful of where they are and adjust accordingly. So again, I know how much I have to walk to trigger this based on how full the bar is, or how many skills I need to activate this based on how full this bar is. So just be mindful of that because it does not reset. So look at this. It's almost already full. And I did it correctly, so it's critting and overpowering again. But again, just be mindful of this because once I go to town, it's going to remain filled up like this. And so you have to be careful where these bars are in order for you to know how much you have to walk to trigger the first buff and then how many casts you need to trigger the second buff. And that's it. That is essentially snapshotting. So the only thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to pit 100 to show you how this actually works in practice. And here we are, guys. So again, when you walk into here, be mindful of where these bars are. As you can see, I did it right. I'm overpowering and critting at the same time. Don't worry about Ancestral Guidance or Quick Shift. For my testing, Cataclysm is going to remember old buffs and new buffs when you replenish it. So just make sure you keep hitting with Stone Strike and Polarize every now and then as you refresh your duration, your Cataclysm is going to remember that. So look at me, I'm absolutely blasting through this content. This is pit 100. I'm critting, I'm overpowering all the time. If you're ever in a bind, just slap an opponent with your Stone Strike to get the damage resistance. Evade through constantly. If you're in a pinch, use Earth and Bulwark, and that's it. You can also activate your Cyclone Armor every now and then to get more damage reduction from our passive, just in case you need it. So it takes a little bit of finicking to really get around snapshotting, but once you master it, you will see how easily I'm clearing pit 100. So the difference in power is actually quite staggering. So if you're really looking to get the most out of Cataclysm, it does pay to practice a little bit until you get it right. Anyway guys, that has been everything and anything that I can possibly show you regarding the Cataclysm Druid build. Thank you so much for your time. I know that it's been a long video. Again, just to remind you, a written guide from D4 builds is going to be down below. If there's anything I didn't cover in the video or the guide, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to ask me in the comments. I read all of them. I will answer if there's anything that I can. And once again, please consider subscribing if you found this helpful. It really helps a ton to a small channel like mine. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Fallen Messiah, and I'll see you in the next one.